Okay, in this video I'm going to walk you through the parts of this torso. Our last video, or second to last video, whichever it was, we talked about this torso over here on the right. For the most part, same things are going to be pretty much the same. There's a few differences. I'll maybe try to point those out as I go. But I figured I'd go ahead and show you this, walk you through this guy, just like I did on the other model. Okay, so it's a lot like the other model in the fact that in the head we've got the left side of the face removed so that we can see into kind of the oral cavity, into the nasal cavity. We can see an exposed brain, and then on the right side we've got the cheek removed. Cheek removed here illustrates the fact that we have the parotid gland sitting underneath of the cheek, between the cheek and the masseter muscle, which is deep to it. Here's parotid gland. Here is the parotid gland's duct, and then you've got the two other salivary glands. The one directly under the tongue shown here is the salivary gland, and the sublingual salivary gland, and then over here, kind of more towards the lateral side of the face, is the submandibular gland. Right away I can kind of pop out the eye since I'm right here. Eye model in this case has the eyebrows or the eyelids still attached. So you got the superior eyelid, the inferior eyelid. It also has a very good, very visible lacrimal gland. And then for the first time we see a lacrimal sac, which is going to collect the tears that run across the face and drain them through the nasal cavity by way of that nasal lacrimal duct. Okay, keeping the eye out, so I can kind of look into the nasal cavity. We're looking at the lateral side of kind of the right nasal cavity, and we can see the three nasal conchae as we've seen with the other models. This one's exposed open, so we can actually see the nasal vestibule, which is that kind of flared portion right in there where my thumb was. Okay, so kind of moving down from the face, we get into kind of the neck region. We can see a very visible thyroid cartilage of the larynx. Okay, and sitting directly below it is the thyroid gland. Okay, so we've got thyroid cartilage, thyroid gland, okay, and then inferior to the thyroid gland, we can see the ridges of the trachea with the many cartilages that surround the trach. Okay, so the trach is right in there beneath that blue blood vessel that's visible kind of on top of it. All right, right now we have the sternum still in place with all the ribs. With this model, you can see the lungs in between each rib, and what's very visible in this case is this cardiac notch where there is kind of a piece of the lung kind of missing. So if I were to stick an arrow towards that, you would know that would be the cardiac notch. Just like the other model, this breastplate comes off with all the ribs, and so do the lungs. Okay, we can see into the thoracic cavity now. We still have kind of part of the lungs. What's nice about this is it actually does show you the three lobes of the lungs on the right side, whereas the left side only has the two lobes, which is separated by that oblique fissure, which you can see there. This is not exactly 100% drawn or made correctly. There should be a horizontal fissure, but then there should also be kind of more of an oblique fissure, kind of like what we saw over here. So not exactly made correctly, but that's okay. So I'm going to remove the heart. Remember, sitting in the middle of our chest is the heart, and on top of the heart would be the thymus gland, if this model included the thymus gland. All right, we remove the heart to expose some more of the deep structures, which includes the end of the trachea and then the first branches of the bronchial tree, what we call the primary or main bronchi. For the first time, we have a visible shot of the esophagus, which is the food tube that delivers the food to the stomach. Okay. This white piece of plastic here is representing the diaphragm, which is that kind of half moon shaped muscle separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. Big organ here right away visibly is the liver, with the right lobe being the very big part of the liver, and then a smaller left lobe separated down the middle by the falciform ligament. If I pop it on the back side here, we illustrate the very visible gallbladder. Okay. All right, so we've gone down past and removed the diaphragm and liver to expose the very visible stomach. Okay, and this model is kind of nice. At the top of the stomach, the beginning of the stomach, we have the lower esophageal or cardiac sphincter, and then visible at the end is the pyloric sphincter, which controls the release of food from the stomach into the duodenum, which is what I got my finger in right now. Another nice piece of or part of this model is that it shows you the inner foldings of the stomach, what we call rugae, which allow for expansion of the stomach as we eat our food. All right, sitting deep to our stomach is a very visible pancreas, and lateral to the stomach is the very visible spleen. Okay, we can also see the tops of the adrenal glands, and we can see the right kidney over here, which we'll talk about a little bit more in just a second. Okay. Right away we can see back in the pancreas the very visible pancreatic duct, okay, which dumps into the small intestine. I can take part of the large intestine away here to show it. So we have the pancreatic duct here, and then the accessory duct above. The pancreatic duct joins with the duct coming from the gallbladder and the liver, what we call the common bile duct, and they all dump into this part of the small intestine, which would be the duodenum. So if I were to stick a piece of tape here, you would have to know that's the duodenum, because this is the very beginning of the small intestine. Okay. The rest of the small intestine, you know, like I said in the other video, it's kind of tough to tell what's what, since it's kind of a singular piece. So really the only place to be able to tell if it's duodenum is right there, and then the rest, jejunum, ileum, are pretty tough to tell from this model. Visible on the backside of the small intestine, just like we saw in the other model, is a very visible mesentery. Now I'm going to put the large intestine kind of back together. We've removed the small intestine, okay, but we still have the large intestine very visible with our model. Okay, here's the very end of our small intestine, what we call the ileum. That opens up through the ileocecal sphincter into the large intestine. Okay, the distal, or not the distal, but this dilated pouch of the large intestine is the cecum, and then you've got the ascending, the transverse, the descending, and then the sigmoid colon that are all very visible with my model intact. Running down the middle of our large intestine is that thickened band of muscle called the tenei coli. Okay? And then holding all the large intestine in place is the mesocolon. Now if I take the large intestine out, it leaves us in our model with the rectum that is not able to be taken out. Okay? So we've kind of removed most of the organs of the abdominal region, and now all we have are those organs that kind of sit very, very far in the back, which include the kidneys, the adrenal glands. So you got the kidneys here and here, the adrenal glands sitting on top of them. Okay, and then at the bottom we have the two ureters running to our very visible bladder. Okay, sorry, I have my camera on it, but the ureters run down and open up into our bladder. And just like we saw with our stomach, there are inner folds of the bladder called rugae. They expand the bladder out, and then we've got a very visible end of our bladder where it tapers to form the urethra as it drains out the external urethral orifice, or we call our pee hole. So that's pretty much the gist of this model. So there you go.